And this story is about a young lady, okay? And this young lady had an appendicitis. And the appendicitis was, 3 days before when the pain started. She was also pregnant. She went to the doctor and they sent her home. That's not really anything. You're just fine. As she kept on getting sicker and sicker, they finally took her to the hospital. The hospital then realized, oh my God, this is a serious case of appendicitis. They had to ship her to another hospital. That meant taking a trip to another hospital. It turns out this hospital was out of network. I want you to hear her story. I swear, I hope at some time I can bring this woman on, because her story is not solely her story. Her story is a story that will affect at some time a large percentage of America. So listen to this TikTok. I'm going to play. I think I got it set up correctly, and we'll take it on the other side.
Recent death of this United Healthcare CEO, I feel like I need to air my dirty laundry. It's been 5 years in the making. December of 2019, I was 20 weeks pregnant. First of all, let me just say this video has all the trigger warnings, every trigger warning. So just proceed with caution. I had excruciating pain in my right lower quadrant of my abdomen, and I was 20 weeks pregnant. I went to the ER in my town that I lived in, and the nurses and physicians there were atrocious to me, humiliated me, told me that I was exaggerating and that I had a UTI and that the blinding pain I was experiencing was actually the baby sitting on my bladder, and they sent me home. So fast forward 3 days later, and I felt like I was dying. My husband took me back to the ER, and a different ER physician who was very compassionate confirmed that I had appendicitis, not a UTI. So I'd been sitting at home with appendicitis for 3 days. That hospital then emergently sent me by ambulance, which was one of the most harrowing and painful experiences I've ever had, up to a big hospital in St. Louis where I could be treated, where they then determined that I did, in fact, have appendicitis and scheduled me for emergency surgery. My son that I was carrying survived the surgery until the next morning when I delivered him, and he passed away in my arms. About 45 minutes after I lost him, I suffered a pulmonary embolism and lost about 3 liters of blood. So I had to have an emergency D&C because I couldn't deliver the placenta, and I felt life leaving my body and saw visions and had what I now know was an actual near-death experience because I was dying. I survived all this. On the 3rd day of being in the hospital, a doctor I'd never seen before came into my room and told me that I had been sent to a hospital that was out of my insurance network. Mind you, I got pregnant very close together with my first son. I had him in February of that year, and this is now December. So we had met our deductible for the year, and the one comfort that my husband and I had in all of this was at least we won't have a bill. It's all covered because we already met our deductible. But we were wrong because the hospital who had misdiagnosed me sent me to a hospital that was not in my insurance network. The kicker is literally across the street. I'll put this here. It could have taken me to Missouri Baptist Hospital, which was in network, and everything would have been covered. So this doctor I'd never seen before told me I could either be sent by ambulance across the street to Missouri Baptist, which was covered, or I could go home. Now, I also want to say that my hemoglobin was 7.0 at this time. If it had been 6.9, I would have needed a blood transfusion. I was in grief that I had never known before. I was in shock. I was all of the things, and I just wanted to go home. We ended up with a bill from the hospital that was more than what we paid for the home that we live in. And it was going to take probably, 20 to 30 years to pay off this hospital bill. It's not like my husband and I made a lot of money. I was a hospice nurse at the time. And we opted to have to file bankruptcy, but not before not before. I exhausted every appeal with Cigna. I wrote letters. I spilled my heart out. I talked on the phone. I explained our situation and our story, thinking surely someone would understand this was not my fault. Like, this was not my fault. On the third and final appeal, because they only allow you 3, Cigna's appeal physician told me point blank, it was my fault when I was dying from a ruptured appendix in the ER that I didn't check and make sure that the hospital I was being sent to by ambulance was in my insurance network, and I was denied the final appeal, saying that we owed the entire bill. So we filed for bankruptcy. And all of this was also in the height of COVID. I'm still not sure how I lived through this, how I got through it by the grace of my therapist. But I say all this to say insurance companies don't care about you. Hospitals and a lot of doctors don't care about you. Just this week, because of this event that I'm describing, it triggered a latent autoimmune disease inside of me called ankylosing spondylitis, which is something that's incurable and causes me not only insane fatigue, but stiffness and pain throughout my body where I can't even pick up my kids or get on the floor and play with them. That new rheumatologist sent me to a lab to get blood work, their quote unquote lab. And I got sent a $2,000 bill because their lab wasn't in network, but the physician wasn't looking out for me. The doctor's office wasn't looking out for me. And at this point, that's my fault. I should have paused and said, no, just because this is your quote unquote lab, I need to double check. But I didn't. I trusted them again. So all of this to say, you have to be your own advocate. And how can you be your own advocate when you're in the middle of a life or death health emergency? I don't know. It's beyond me. I couldn't even think straight. So I don't know how I was supposed to, call my insurance and say, hey, can this ambulance take me to this hospital? But apparently it was my fault. So, there's all this uproar about people thinking it's hysterical that this man was murdered and lost his life. And I'm a love and light kind of person. I care about humanity. I think every person has the capacity to be a better person and change and get second chances. But when they're profiting off of the deaths and this illness and sickness and pain and grief off of human beings, it doesn't really surprise me.
Heard what she said. Not advocating murder or anything, but after she's gone through what she's gone through, and after seeing that the insurance company cared nothing about her life, but was ready to suck money out of her for the malpractice of the healthcare system to her, and that it is, again, ultimately the buck stops with those who run these companies. She said, it doesn't surprise her that people, when they don't have a last resort, that they act out. And I want people to think about that. Now, she gave a follow-up because apparently some people started to give her some issues. So what I want to do is I want to go with the follow-up that she has, because there are certain parts of the follow-up that's even a bit more biting. I want you to listen to this. And then, of course, again, we'll take it on the other side, because this is something that should not be happening in America. This is something
in response to my first video where I talk about lots of trigger warnings, my experience of almost dying, of losing my baby, and then having to file bankruptcy because of the U.S. healthcare system. I have gotten, first of all, I want to thank everyone for their kindness that they've shown me and the messages of sharing your own stories. I have gotten this comment more than any other comment. Apologize if I wasn't clear in the first video. I am still 5 years later in an active lawsuit against the first hospital that misdiagnosed me and, in my humble opinion, caused the death of my son and almost myself, along with the cascade of health problems that I'm still dealing with, the grief, the insurmountable grief. Our finances have never recovered from this situation. I could go on and on. And I also want to clarify that I am not trying to say that I feel like CEOs or other individuals should be murdered. I'm just saying that given my lived experience, I am not surprised that this happened. How can there be reform in healthcare without loss of life? But the problem is there is loss of life. It's us, the common people. I didn't wake up the morning of November 26, 2019 and say, my appendix is going to rupture this morning and cause the loss of my child I was carrying and almost cause my own death and create a pulmonary embolism where I'd have to have a second emergency surgery DNC and lose all these liters of blood and kickstart this latent autoimmune disease that's incurable that I'm going to get to live with for the rest of my life. I didn't wake up that morning choosing this. So I think it's important to recognize that human beings deserve the right to healthcare. When you place profit above people, you are saying that my existence only serves to benefit the few, millionaires, multimillionaires, billionaires. And so that is why I shared my story, because it's important for our stories to be heard and shared. That my situation, unfortunately, is not an isolated case. Human beings and their grief and their lived experiences deserve to be heard and seen, and there needs to be reform. Almost every other developed country in the free world has universal health care. I've also had a plethora of comments saying, well, why don't you just leave the United States? The United States literally has made it where you are living paycheck to paycheck. Most people are lucky. Most people are lucky to be living paycheck to paycheck in this country. After this event, there's no savings to be had. There's no out from this country. I live in fear that something could happen to me or one of my loved ones again, and then I don't know what. I also wanted to mention that in this event that occurred in 2019, my husband and I were paying, it was either between $500 or $700 a month for Cigna insurance to be denied. Yeah, it's my story. Some people have also expressed that they have trouble believing my story, and I get that because my story is insane. It's hard to conceptualize.
Yeah. So anyway, yes, it's hard to believe that this is real. But you know what, folks? It is real. We've gone through it ourselves in as much as we've had insurance and had to fight these guys to the nail. Not only the insurance company, but the private emergency rooms, etc., etc. Bridge MCP points out something that is very important, and that is women get a different treatment than men get at hospitals. In her case, she had a heart attack. The guy next to her had heartburn. Of course, he got care. By the time they got around to her, they found out she was the one with the heart attack. The guy who got all the care was the one getting the real cure for something.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number one, subscribe to our channel. And number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.